Consider this. You are a young man. You are in college or recently finished. You are healthy, athletic, social. You are out with friends on a Friday or Saturday night. You are at a bar, a party, a campus event. You are doing exactly what millions of young men your age do every weekend in every city in this country. And then, you are separated from your group. Someone sees you walking alone or near the water. And then you are in the water. And then you are found in the water. And then an investigation is opened, and the investigation concludes, sometimes quickly, sometimes after weeks, that you drowned. That you fell, or stumbled, or made the kind of catastrophic error of judgment that alcohol is so well documented to produce. That it was an accident. That it was tragic. That it was preventable. That it was, at its heart, the kind of thing that happens to young men who drink near rivers. Your case is closed. Now consider that this has happened more than 40 times. That the victims share a remarkable consistency: young men, mostly white, predominantly college students or recent graduates, physically fit, described by those who knew them as responsible, safety-conscious, not the type to wander toward a river drunk and alone. That the rivers involved span more than 25 states, from Minnesota to Pennsylvania, from Indiana to New York, from Iowa to Louisiana. That the men are almost always found in water that, given the circumstances of their last known location, required them to travel a significant and sometimes inexplicable distance to reach. That in the weeks and months after many of these deaths, investigators discovered something near the water where the body was found. A symbol, sprayed in paint on a wall, on a bridge, on a surface near the scene. A smiley face. A smiley face. Found near the water. In case after case after case. 2 retired NYPD detectives have spent more than 2 decades following these deaths. They believe the smiley faces are not coincidence. They believe the drownings are not accidents. They believe something else is happening. And whether you find their theory convincing, frightening, or deeply uncertain, this documentary will give you the information you need to decide for yourself. This documentary presents the evidence. You decide what it means. Kevin Gannon spent 25 years with the New York City Police Department. Anthony Duarte spent 20 years with the same department. Together they investigated homicides. They processed crime scenes. They built cases. They testified in court. They are, by any professional measure, experienced investigators who understand how evidence works, how bodies behave in water, and how to distinguish between a death that is what it appears to be and a death that is not. They are not conspiracy theorists in the conventional sense of the word. They are retired law enforcement professionals who looked at a series of cases, identified what they believed was a pattern, and spent more than 2 decades pursuing it. Their investigation began in 1997 with a single case. It began with one case. In 1997. In New York City. The case was the death of Patrick McNeil. Patrick McNeil was a 21-year-old student at Fordham University in New York City. He was last seen leaving a bar near campus in February 1997. He was found in the East River 5 weeks later. His death was ruled accidental. Gannon and Duarte, reviewing the case as part of their work, noticed something that, to them, did not sit cleanly with the accidental drowning conclusion. The distance between where Patrick was last seen and where he entered the water, assuming the official explanation, required a walk through areas of the city he had no apparent reason to visit, at a time of night when that walk would have been difficult to explain. And near the location where his body was recovered, someone had painted a smiley face on a wall. Gannon and Duarte filed that detail and moved on. And then, as the years passed, they began to see it again. And then they began to see it again. The methodology Gannon and Duarte applied to their investigation was, by their own description, systematic. They gathered official case files wherever they could access them. They drove to the cities where the deaths had occurred. They interviewed family members. They walked the routes between the last known locations and the water. And they photographed the graffiti near the recovery sites. What they documented across more than 40 cases in more than 25 states over more than 2 decades was the repeated presence of smiley face imagery near the locations where the victims were found. Not always in exactly the same form. Sometimes a simple circle with 2 dots and a curve. Sometimes more elaborate. Sometimes accompanied by other symbols, a cross, a number, a phrase. But a smiley face. Present. Near the water. Near the body. More than 40 cases. More than 25 states. The smiley faces were there. Gannon and Duarte presented their findings publicly for the first time in 2008 at a press conference in New York City. They stated their belief, based on their investigation, that the drowning deaths they had cataloged were not random accidents but were connected homicides, possibly committed by one or more organized groups operating across multiple states. The response from law enforcement agencies that had officially closed the cases was, almost uniformly, skeptical. The FBI reviewed the theory and declined to open a formal investigation. Medical examiners who had ruled the individual deaths accidental maintained their conclusions. Prosecutors who had closed the cases saw no basis for reopening them. The FBI reviewed the theory. Declined to investigate. Most agencies maintained their conclusions. And yet Gannon and Duarte continued. Because they had spoken to the families. And the families, in case after case, had their own reasons for not believing the official explanation. In any investigation of this nature, in any case where a theory has been proposed connecting multiple deaths that were officially ruled accidents, there is a risk that the victims become data. That they become points on a map, entries in a spreadsheet, examples in an argument. We are going to resist that. Because the reason this theory has persisted, the reason families have continued to push, the reason retired detectives have continued to investigate, the reason this documentary exists is not the smiley faces. It is the people. Chris Jenkins was 21 years old. He was a student at the University of Minnesota. He was, by every account from those who knew him, a responsible, safety-conscious young man who did not take unnecessary risks. He was last seen at a Halloween party in Minneapolis in October 2002. He was wearing a Native American costume. He vanished. His body was found in the Mississippi River in February 2003, 4 months later. Initially, his death was ruled an accident. His family did not accept that conclusion. 4 years later, in 2006, the Hennepin County medical examiner changed the ruling. Chris Jenkins's death was reclassified as a homicide. Chris Jenkins, 21 years old, University of Minnesota. Death reclassified as homicide. That reclassification is significant and it deserves attention. Because it is not a reclassification that Gannon and Duarte made. It is a reclassification that was made by official investigators, by a medical examiner's office, in response to evidence that had accumulated in the years following the original ruling. It is, in the specific context of this documentary, the documentary that is committed to presenting what is known versus what is theorized, one of the strongest pieces of factual ground the Smiley Face theory stands on. An official medical examiner, in an official proceeding, looked at a death that had been ruled accidental and changed the ruling to homicide. Lucas Homan was 21 years old. He was a student at Loras College in Dubuque, Iowa. He was found in the Mississippi River in March 2009, 6 days after he was last seen leaving a bar near campus. His death was ruled accidental. A smiley face was found painted on a bridge near the recovery site. Scott Radel was 23 years old. He was found in a river in La Crosse, Wisconsin in March 1998. La Crosse, Wisconsin appears multiple times in the documented cases. 5 young men have drowned in the Black River and the Mississippi River in La Crosse since 1997. 5. In a city with a relatively small downtown area and a relatively small student population. The La Crosse drownings received significant local media attention. La Crosse police conducted extensive investigations into the deaths. Their official conclusion, alcohol-related accidents, made more likely by the proximity of downtown bars to the river and the absence of protective barriers along portions of the waterfront. 5 drownings. La Crosse, Wisconsin. Official conclusion, accidents. The La Crosse city government, responding to community concern, eventually installed safety measures along the riverfront, additional lighting, barriers, improved pathways away from the water's edge. The drowning deaths in that area stopped. To some, this is evidence that the deaths were indeed accidents, that environmental safety improvements eliminated an environmental hazard. To Gannon and Duarte, the cessation of deaths in La Crosse after increased surveillance and safety infrastructure does not explain the deaths that continued to occur in other cities. Joshua Guimond was 20 years old. He was a student at St. John's University in Minnesota. He was last seen leaving a party on campus in November 2002. He was never found. He remains officially listed as a missing person. Joshua Guimond, 20 years old. Still officially listed as missing. Never found. The victim profiles that Gannon and Duarte compiled across their 40-plus cases are remarkably consistent. The victims are predominantly male. Predominantly white. Predominantly between the ages of 18 and 27. Predominantly college students or recent graduates. Predominantly physically fit and described by those who knew them as responsible and unlikely to take careless risks near water. They are last seen, in almost every case, in the context of a social event, a bar, a party, a gathering. They are found in water. The distance between where they were last seen and where they are found frequently requires, under the accidental explanation, a walk that investigators and family members describe as inconsistent with the victim's known level of impairment, their familiarity with the area, or simply the geography involved. The consistency across cases is what drives the theory. Gannon and Duarte have documented it for decades. The families of these young men have, in many cases, spent years fighting for a reinvestigation. They have funded private investigations. They have hired forensic experts. They have lobbied local officials. They have spoken to journalists and documentarians and podcasters. They have, in the particular way of people who have lost someone and have been given an explanation that does not account for everything they know about that person, refused to let it go. Their refusal is not sentiment. It is, in many cases, based on specific, concrete questions that the official investigations did not answer. The smiley faces. Let us talk about the smiley faces directly, because this is the element of the theory that has attracted the most attention, the most skepticism, and the most genuine investigative debate. Gannon and Duarte's position is specific. They do not claim that every smiley face found near water in America is significant. They do not claim that a smiley face, on its own, constitutes evidence of anything. What they claim is this. In the specific cases they have investigated, the smiley face imagery appears near recovery sites with a frequency and consistency that, in their professional judgment as experienced homicide detectives, exceeds what chance or the general prevalence of smiley face graffiti in urban environments would predict. They also note that the symbols they have documented are not always identical. They have cataloged variations, smileys with specific additional markings, smileys accompanied by particular numbers or letters, smileys in specific colors. They believe these variations may represent signatures. That the symbols may have meaning to whoever is placing them there, a form of communication, or a marker, or a record. Gannon and Duarte, not all smiley faces, specific variations, specific locations, specific patterns. The forensic case for the theory rests on several additional pillars beyond the graffiti itself. The first is the toxicology question. In several of the documented cases, the toxicology results from the recovered bodies showed blood alcohol levels that, while elevated, were below the level at which most medical experts would expect a person of the victim's body weight and apparent fitness to become so disoriented as to walk into deep water alone. This does not prove anything. Alcohol affects individuals differently. A person can behave in unpredictable ways at blood alcohol levels that would leave another person largely functional. But in cases where the family knew the victim well, where friends and family have stated that the victim had significant alcohol tolerance and experience, a blood alcohol level that seems insufficient to explain an accidental drowning is a question worth asking. The toxicology question. Blood alcohol levels in some cases were lower than expected to explain the drowning. The second is the body position question. Medical examiners and forensic pathologists who have reviewed multiple cases in the smiley face context, some at the request of families, some at the request of Gannon and Duarte, have noted that the position in which several of the bodies were recovered was inconsistent with the expected behavior of a drowning victim who entered the water voluntarily. This is a genuinely contested area of forensic pathology. Experts disagree. Water moves bodies in complex and sometimes counterintuitive ways. Decomposition affects positioning. Environmental factors, current, depth, temperature all influence how and where a body is ultimately found. But the inconsistency has been noted by credentialed forensic professionals in enough cases to merit documentation. Body position in some cases, noted by forensic professionals as inconsistent with voluntary drowning. The third is the geographical pattern. When Gannon and Duarte mapped the cases, when they placed the locations of the deaths on a map and looked at the proximity of college campuses, the proximity of waterways, the timing of the deaths, predominantly fall and winter, the academic calendar, and the routes that victims would have had to travel to reach the water from their last known locations, they found what they describe as a coherence that accidental explanations struggle to account for. This is, admittedly, a pattern that exists at the level of the overview. Individual cases can be explained individually. The argument is about the aggregate. The pattern is in the aggregate. Individual cases can be explained. The whole is harder to dismiss. You've just heard the evidence as Gannon and Duarte present it. Next, we hear what official investigators say about it. This is where the documentary gets genuinely complex. Don't miss it. Subscribe now if you haven't already, and share this video with someone who needs to hear this story. Share plus subscribe, the counterarguments are next. This documentary committed, in its opening, to presenting both sides of this theory. And the other side, the official position of law enforcement agencies, forensic experts, and criminologists who have reviewed Gannon and Duarte's work, is substantive, evidence-based, and deserves to be heard with the same attentiveness we have given to the theory itself. The FBI's position, as stated when they reviewed the Smiley Face theory in 2008, was direct. The agency found no evidence of a coordinated series of murders. They found no forensic link between the cases. They found no evidence of a conspiracy or organized group. They noted that accidental drowning is one of the leading causes of death among young men in the United States, particularly young men who have been drinking. This is not a fringe statistical claim. It is one of the most robustly supported findings in public health research on college-age mortality. Young men between the ages of 18 and 24 are statistically the highest risk demographic for accidental drowning, particularly in association with alcohol consumption. FBI reviewed the theory in 2008. Found no evidence of coordination. Maintained accidental rulings. The smiley face graffiti argument has attracted particular scrutiny from researchers and criminologists. A 2008 study conducted by researchers at criminology departments reviewed the prevalence of smiley face imagery in urban graffiti across American cities. Their finding, smiley faces are extraordinarily common in urban graffiti environments. They appear on bridges, walls, and waterways throughout American cities with a frequency that makes their presence near any given location, including riverbanks, statistically predictable rather than remarkable. The study did not conclude that the smiley face theory was wrong. It concluded that the presence of smiley face graffiti near a drowning site, by itself, cannot be considered meaningful forensic evidence in the absence of other specific, linkable characteristics. Criminologists, smiley faces are common in urban graffiti. Presence near water is not statistically remarkable by itself. The victim profile argument, the observation that the victims are consistently young, white, male, and college-educated, has also been addressed by official investigators. Their response is similarly statistical. Young, white, college-aged men are the demographic most likely to be in the specific social contexts, bars near waterways, late-night outdoor environments with alcohol, in which accidental drowning is most likely to occur. They are also, investigators note, the demographic whose deaths are most likely to attract the kind of sustained investigative attention and family advocacy that generates the documentation Gannon and Duarte have built their case from. This is not a dismissal of the family's concerns. It is an observation about selection effects in the evidence base. Official investigators, the demographic profile reflects who is most at risk in specific social environments. The medical examiner and forensic pathology community has been largely aligned with the official position, with some exceptions. The standard forensic position is that drowning is a diagnosis of exclusion, that when a body is recovered from water and no other cause of death is identifiable on examination, drowning is the appropriate conclusion in the context of the other available evidence. Alcohol intoxication near water, particularly in cold temperatures, in the dark, in urban environments with poorly lit and poorly fenced waterway access is, forensic experts state, a sufficient explanation for the pattern of deaths without requiring the invocation of a coordinated series of homicides. These are serious, substantive counterarguments. And the responsible position, the position this documentary takes, is to hold them alongside the theory's evidence and acknowledge that the gap between them has not been closed. not definitively in favor of the theory. Not definitively in favor of the official explanation. The gap has not been closed. Not definitively. In either direction. What remains, when you hold both sides together, is this. More than 40 young men have drowned in rivers across the United States over more than 25 years. In at least one case, Chris Jenkins, an official medical examiner's reclassification determined that the death was a homicide. In several other cases, families and private investigators have raised specific, concrete questions about the official explanations that have not been fully answered. The smiley face graffiti may be coincidence. The victim profile may be statistical. The toxicology questions may have explanations that forensic science has not yet fully explored. Or something else may be happening. Beyond the aggregate theory, beyond the pattern and the symbols and the statistics, there are individual cases that carry specific, concrete, documentable questions. Questions that are not satisfactorily answered by the general explanation of alcohol-related accidental drowning. Questions that deserve to be named. The case of Chad Sharon. Chad Sharon was a 22-year-old student at Western Michigan University. He disappeared in March 2002 after attending a party near campus in Kalamazoo, Michigan. He was found in the Kalamazoo River. The official ruling, accidental drowning. The question is family and investigators have raised. Chad Sharon was found 4 miles downstream from the last location where he was seen. 4 miles. In water that, at the time of his disappearance, was running at temperatures cold enough to incapacitate a person very quickly, cold enough that survival in the water for the distance required by the accidental explanation would have been, according to experts consulted by the family, extremely unlikely. How did he travel 4 miles in that water? The official investigation did not provide a specific answer to that question. 4 miles downstream. In near freezing water. The question was not answered. The case of Dakota James. Dakota James was a 23-year-old graduate student at Duquesne University in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He was last seen on surveillance footage near the Ohio River in January 2017, after leaving a bar. He was found in the river 3 months later. His death was ruled accidental. His parents, Patricia and Michael James, conducted their own investigation. They hired private investigators. They questioned the official timeline. They specifically raised concerns about a gap in the available surveillance footage, a gap in the coverage of the route between where Dakota was last seen and the river's edge. What happened in that gap? The answer, as of this production, remains unclear. A surveillance gap between his last known location and the river. Unexplained. The case of Nathan Kapfer. Nathan Kapfer was a 19-year-old student at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse. He was one of the 5 young men who drowned in La Crosse. He was found in the Black River in November 1998. He had left a party and was last seen walking in the direction of campus, not in the direction of the river. His direction of travel, as established by witnesses who saw him leave the party, was inconsistent with reaching the location where his body was found by any direct route. If he was walking toward campus and ended up in the river, something changed his direction. The official investigation recorded his death as an accidental drowning. Walking toward campus. Found in the river. Direction inconsistent. Ruled accidental. These cases are not presented here as proof of the smiley face theory. They are presented as what they factually are, cases with specific unanswered questions, officially closed, in which families and private investigators believe the official explanation is incomplete. The question of whether those questions point to a coordinated series of homicides, the specific claim of the Smiley Face Theory, is one that this documentary does not answer, because it cannot be answered with the evidence currently available. What can be said, what the evidence supports, is that these cases deserved, and in several instances did not receive, the depth of investigation that unanswered questions of this kind require. These cases deserve deeper investigation. Whether they received it is a legitimate question. The cases you just heard about, the specific questions that haven't been answered, are the reason this theory has persisted for almost 30 years. In the next segment, we look at where the investigation stands today. Subscribe if you haven't already. Investigations like this take time and resources. Your support makes it possible. Support the investigation. Links in description. In the years since Gannon and Duarte presented their theory publicly in 2008, several things have changed. And several things have not. What has changed? The conversation. The Smiley Face Theory has attracted sustained investigative journalism, documentary filmmaking, and academic attention that has expanded both the evidence base and the critical analysis available to anyone who wants to study the cases seriously. The Oxygen Network produced a multi-episode documentary series examining the theory and specific cases within it. The series brought additional cases to public attention and encouraged families who had not previously been in contact with Gannon and Duarte to come forward. Academic researchers at several universities have examined specific aspects of the theory, the toxicology data, the geographical patterns, the forensic pathology of the individual cases, and published peer-reviewed analysis. Not all of that analysis supports the theory. Some of it does. The academic conversation is ongoing and unresolved, which is precisely where an evidence base of this kind should be. Academic research. Documentary investigation. The conversation has grown. The question remains open. What has changed? Some individual cases. Chris Jenkins's reclassification as a homicide remains the most significant official acknowledgement that at least one death in the Smiley Face case cluster was not an accident. A handful of other cases have been reopened, formally or informally, in response to new evidence or family advocacy. None have resulted in a criminal charge or arrest as of this production. The question of who killed Chris Jenkins, if the homicide ruling is correct, has not been answered. Chris Jenkins, ruled homicide. No arrest. No charge. The question of who remains unanswered. What has changed? Awareness. The Smiley Face Theory has generated meaningful conversation about waterway safety, bar proximity to rivers and lakes, and the safety of college-age students in urban environments with poorly secured waterfront access. Multiple cities that have been associated with cases in the cluster have implemented waterfront safety improvements, additional lighting, protective barriers, improved signage. The drowning rate in some of those cities has decreased following those improvements. Whether the decrease reflects the elimination of an environmental hazard, supporting the accidental explanation, or the disruption of conditions that made the area more accessible to someone exploiting them, supporting the theory, is a question the available data cannot resolve. What has not changed? The core official position. The FBI has not opened a formal investigation into the Smiley Face Theory. The majority of the cases in Gannon and Duarte's documented cluster remain officially closed as accidental drownings. Law enforcement agencies that have been contacted about the theory have, in most cases, maintained that their original investigations were thorough and their conclusions sound. Core official position, unchanged. Most cases remain officially closed. Kevin Gannon, as of the most recent public accounts available, continues to investigate. He continues to receive contacts from families of young men who have drowned in circumstances they believe are inconsistent with the accident explanation. He continues to add cases to the documented cluster. He continues to look for the forensic link, the specific, concrete, legally admissible evidence that would move this theory from the domain of investigative hypothesis to the domain of prosecutable fact. He has not found it yet. He has not found it yet. He continues to look. Whether the smiley face theory is correct, whether these deaths represent a coordinated series of homicides rather than a series of tragic accidents, is a question that, as of this production, remains genuinely, consequentially open. That openness is not comfortable. But it is honest. And honesty is the only framework within which an investigation of this kind can eventually arrive at the truth. The smiley face theory is, at its heart, a theory about a question. Not the question of whether a coordinated murder conspiracy exists, though that is the theory's most dramatic and controversial claim. But a deeper question. A simpler one. When a young man is found drowned, when a healthy, responsible, safety-conscious young man ends up in a river after a night out and an investigation finds no direct evidence of foul play, is the word accident always sufficient? Is it always the right answer? Is the investigation, in every case, thorough enough to be sure? The official answer, from the agencies that have reviewed the smiley face cases, is yes. The family's answer, the answer of the parents and siblings and friends who have lived with these deaths, who have asked specific questions and received general answers, who have looked at the distance between where their son was last seen and where he was found and said that doesn't make sense, is no. Neither of those answers is simply wrong. Both of them are based in something real. Both answers are based in something real. The question between them has not been resolved. What this documentary has attempted to do, what responsible journalism about a theory like this one must do, is present both sides with equal rigor. The evidence Gannon and Duarte have compiled is real. The questions their investigation raises are legitimate. The reclassification of Chris Jenkins's death as a homicide is an official, documented fact. The counter-arguments from forensic experts, criminologists, and law enforcement are equally real. The statistical evidence for accidental drowning as the explanation for most of these deaths is legitimate. The absence of a forensic link connecting the cases is a genuine evidentiary gap in the theory. What you believe, where you land on the question of whether these deaths were accidents, whether some of them were murders, whether the smiley face theory represents the most significant unsolved serial crime in American history or the most extensive investigative pattern match that doesn't hold up on closer examination, is, ultimately, your decision to make with the information available. We have given you that information. What we cannot give you, what nobody can give you, as of today, is the definitive answer. The definitive answer does not exist yet. That, in itself, is something worth sitting with. The families of the young men in these cases have been sitting with it for years. For some of them, 4 decades. They have attended anniversary memorial services at the waterways where their sons were found. They have fielded calls from journalists and documentarians and podcasters and researchers. They have answered the same questions hundreds of times in the hope that one conversation, one article, one documentary will be the one that moves someone in an official position to look again. They continue to hope. Whatever the truth of the smiley face theory, whatever investigators eventually determine, with the benefit of better forensic tools and more complete data than currently exist. The families deserve that answer. The young men who drowned deserve that answer. Patrick McNeil, Chris Jenkins, Lucas Holman, Nathan Kapfer, Chad Sharon, Dakota James, Joshua Giemond, and the others. The ones whose families have not yet been connected to the investigation. The ones whose cases are in files in small-town police departments that have never been linked to a larger pattern. They were people. They had names. They had families who still say those names. They had families who still say those names. Subscribe for new Sinister Secrets investigations every week. Share this video. This story deserves to reach more people. Tell us in the comments, do you believe the theory? We want to know.